Have you ever wondered why the track that you're mixing doesn't sound professional by any standards or any means? Or have you ever tried to mix to the point of a reference track and realize that there's no way that you can actually get there? I think we've all succumbed to these things as mixers, as engineers, and there are so many things that can stop that from happening. And I think by the end of this episode, I know by the end of this episode, I will be able to help you guys understand what is separating your mix or even a friend's mix from a professional mix, what we consider to be industry standard. So make sure to stay tuned for the rest of this episode because I'm going to be breaking this down into the top 5 things that are separating these areas between pros and beginners. So yeah, what's happening, fam? Miami here with JST, and today I'm going to be doing exactly what I said because it gets frustrating when you're sitting behind a keyboard for a long time and maybe you're a bedroom producer and you're trying to understand why is it that no matter what I do, I can never get my stuff to sound like the things that I listen to casually, something that I listen to in a car or something that I want to show my friend or share with a friend. Maybe it's an important song to you. Maybe it's something you wrote about a family member or something that happened to a friend. You're like, I need this to sound as great as it possibly can. You're punching yourself because it just never gets there. Yeah, I just want to help out in that way because I understand that feeling. So we're going to get straight into it, not too much fluff, but we're going to, skip the intro and get straight to the info. Let's talk about it. Number 1, the biggest difference between pros and beginners is starting off with the right source tracks. Now, when you're dealing with the stems that a professional is going to get, they're going to be quality controlled most of the time. And no one's going to want to spend a lot of money sending tracks that aren't QC'd to somebody pro to mix because you're going to be wasting your money, right? So the stems are going to be good, the quality is going to be good. And when I say the source tracks that these people are getting, let's think about what happens at the source. First off, if you're a singer, at the source, how does the singer sound? What microphone is he singing into? What preamp is he going into? Is it being gain staged correctly on the way in? Are they compressing on the way in? Are they making sure that the compression is not being overdone on the way in so it's not something that can't be rectified later? These are all little things that stack up to be a big thing because that's just vocals. Then we have guitars. What kind of pick are they using? What kind of strings are they using? What's the guitar they're using? What kind of pickups are in that guitar? Are they good pickups? Are they the right pickups for the song? So these are all things that you have to think about when you're dealing with these source tracks. The best way that I could explain this is, have you ever tried to cover a song before? And you go through and re-record the guitars, or somebody sent you the guitars and you're trying to use a drum MIDI and do all this stuff. Maybe it's files that you found in the Ultimate Stem Share or it's online, and you're trying to make that sound like something that happened in the studio in which somebody spent tons of money trying to get the perfect takes over and over again. They're using the highest quality gear, the highest quality preamps, and you're like, okay, how do I get this to sound like this? And the reality is, even if the same person was playing both of those things, it might get pretty close, but you're not going to have the ability to do something at that level if you're not starting with the same files. And it just is what it is. And this is a big thing, especially for people that do Nail the Mix, right? The competition, when you're doing the Nail the Mix competitions, you start with audio files that are the same ones that the mixer had. So now you got no excuse. You should be able to make it sound great because you're starting at the same point that they started at. But because they're used to working with these kind of files, there's things that they know that you don't. They know that that sample that's there doesn't actually need to be EQ'd. They liked the way that that sample sounded layered with the thing was in it when they first did it. But you don't know that because you weren't there during the tracking process. They have certain information about it that you don't. So you're going in blind. And that is one thing though. That's an example of, okay, we have the same files. How good can we do? And a lot of times those mixes come out sounding great. Sometimes almost just as good as the original. But what if they were like, okay, well, let's do another alternative thing to Nail the Mix. You're going to remake these tracks and you're going to try and get them to sound as good, and then you're going to mix it, because that's the world that you're trying to step into if you want to have the same quality of the stuff that you want to work on. So hopefully that answers that. Number 2, dealing with low end. Dealing with low end is probably the biggest issue that I hear when people are sending me mixes. When people are sending me mixes or they're trying to have me do a one-on-one with them and they're like, what are the biggest problems that I have with this? What's the quickest fix that I can do? What are some key areas I can work on? Low end is always one of those issues. And where it usually lies at, well, where it always lies at is the area between your low mids, 250 hertz to like 500 hertz, somewhere in that area. Their mixes are typically muddy and not taken care of. The bass is flopping around, and everything under 100 hertz. So they probably didn't roll off a lot of low end from the vocals and the guitars, and that stuff is starting to clutter with the kick and the bass. And the kick and bass aren't locking now, so you have a muddy area there. Those are the two biggest offenders when I'm listening to something of someone that's a beginner or maybe even on their way to intermediate and trying to compare them to somebody that's a professional, because somebody that's a pro would never let that fly. That's kind of basic stuff that we understand at this point. And if you don't really get the way that bass should be working in a song, there is a video that I have, I'll leave it in the description below, destroying low mids that ruin your bass tone. That is one of the quickest tricks to open up a mix to make sure that you don't have those problems anymore. So there's number 2. Number 3, over EQing. This is a big one because when you don't know how to properly EQ something, you see somebody that starts looking for ringing frequencies and they just start pulling everything down. They're sweeping, they're getting rid of this frequency, that frequency, this frequency, that frequency. And by the time that they're done, they've taken away all the life of the actual instrument that they were trying to showcase in the first place. And one thing you want to think about is you never want to take away from that actual source sound. If you got that source tone sounding good, you want to be able to showcase it. And over EQing is definitely one way to ruin a stem instantaneously. So I just want to point this out. This typically happens a lot in guitars. You can kill the life of a guitar really quickly. You can kill a vocal very quickly, especially when you're not using something like a de-esser and people like to go and grab and start just pulling out dips of things. One thing to remember when you are EQing things, especially when you are sweep EQing to find resonances, if the sound does not stay there the entire time that the track is playing, or at least in a big section of the track, that is not a ringing frequency. That might just be that something is being played and the note of that is increasing in volume because that is the fundamental note of what's being played. And a lot of times people get that confused. Like someone might be looking at a graph of something on an EQ and be like, oh, this is spiking here. Well, maybe the person was singing that note, right? And if they're singing that note, it's going to spike in that moment, but the moment they stop singing that, that's going to go away. These are things to think about when you're EQing. And another thing, do not get too surgical with EQ. Try to leave it to a few surgical points if you have to, and try to work in broader strokes when you're doing EQ. So that would be number 3. The biggest thing that I notice is the difference between beginner and pro stuff. Number 4 is knowing your tools well. So most of the mixers that I know, when I talk to them about newer plugins that are coming up, besides a few that come to their mind that really stick with them, they've been using the same tools for a long time. They get familiar with an EQ and they're going to use that EQ over and over again. Why? Because they understand how that EQ works. They understand its slope. You know, if the roll off of it is 18 and they understand the difference between that and 24, what that's going to sound like. And a lot of times we get caught up in the day-to-day, okay, let's try to get every tool that we possibly can. And then you don't take the time to actually go in and use each one of those tools. One thing that Joey said to me a long time that I thought was really important is he was like, read the manual every time you buy a plugin. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, yeah, if you read the manual every time you buy a plugin, you're going to care about it more because you're going to understand how it works. And you're going to pay attention and want to get the most out of your money when you're dealing with something. And that was something I took to heart. So whenever I would go into a situation where I'm using a new plugin or someone sent me something or I bought something, I wanted to understand how the thing worked, and it became an integral tool in my workflow. Doing what I do, people send me plugins all the time. You know, I have thousands of them, installed. And the reality is, I'd probably use the same like 40 plugins over and over again, and that's all that I need. And most pros that I know, they don't have a million plugins on their computer. They literally have what they need to get the job done, because they don't have the time or resources to spend sitting there trying to integrate a new tool into their workflow. So that's another thing to think about. And number 5, not overthinking the mix. This is the biggest thing. Most people that are pros are not spending more than half a day on a mix. They're probably mixing a couple songs a day. Some people are doing it in an hour or two, depending on how their templates are set up or how unique they're trying to make the mix. I've been caught in the spot where I've mixed a song for a week at a time. Like, I'm sure you've all been there. We've gone back, we got mix revision 1, 2, 3, 4, final 3, 4, final X, Z, this, that, and the third. We've all done that, right? But what happens is you get lost in it. And the one thing I've realized by being in major studios is once you start feeling the song and it starts feeling like a song, it's like it's done. You could go back and maybe change that snare to be 1 dB louder or lower, or maybe push the guitars up just a tad, maybe do some light automation. But when you start getting into like, oh, like now let's change this whole bass tone now, let's do this, that is the area in which you have lost your way. And understanding when something is done, understanding when gain staging is proper, and the way that the bus compression is gluing everything together is making a snare sound or a kick and a snare combination sound, hearing that is a very large part of the job. So if I was to go through it, these are what I would say are the top 5 things that are the most important between that. And we can go through it again. Starting with the right track, your source tracks. Dealing with your low end, over EQing, knowing your tools well, and of course, not overthinking the mix. These would be the 5 things that I would say you should focus on if you want to understand the difference between the mindset of a pro and a beginner. And hopefully you can take that going forward so that you don't get stuck and caught up on working on things for long periods of time and not getting the desired results. And you know, if you're an engineer on the come up, give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. You only have to do it one time. And tap that bell for notification so when a video drops, you know the location. Till next time, my friends. I'll catch you later.